Why is it called welcome to our live stream as well? That's nonsense. Let's call it plain speaking air power wins wars. Let's see what happens. Are we live now? Do you know?
Yep,
We are?
we are. The other, yes, yeah.
My god, it actually works. Okay, amazing. Alright, so first troubleshooting has passed and we are live. Welcome everybody in the chat. Apologies for those who have been waiting. Cannon Fodder, how are you? We're trying out a new streaming software here to see if it works or doesn't work. And since we are 20 minutes late, you can already guess that it doesn't actually work that well. But that's mainly because we are, or rather I am, getting to grips with the software. Landor, hello. Mean Mother Stuka, hello. And yes, Justin, you're completely out of frame. What's going on? What are
Oh
you
yeah, I'm
conspiring?
just still getting my, yeah, I'm just conspiring.
It's like, Justin
Just
is
getting
here,
my chat
everybody. He
open.
just doesn't care. He just doesn't. He's like, I'm whipping up an operational plan for the IGN to take Malaya. I don't care about anything else.
Okay.
Right. As you can see, chat, so Justin and I, basically, we have this idea of maybe streaming once a month, pending our schedules. I want to stream a little bit more than that in the future when time permits. It's been an aspiration of mine for a while to have a bit more interaction with all of you. It's just that life tends to get in the way of these things. But we're trying here with this first inaugural stream to kick this off again, and then I will hopefully be able to continue with some sort of consistency, and Justin can turn up as well. There is no set plan of what we're going to do today. Justin, I think we'll just generally talk about the stuff that we've maybe been doing, with the stuff that we've been reading, something like that. Nerd out about, I don't know, your Raven Guard Warhammers, and I'll talk about my Special Naval Landing Force bolt action Japanese riflemen. I don't know, we'll see. Yeah, Landor must get your Stuka book. Thank you very much. There is a sale coming up very soon for all books that came out with Military History Group, including, and I just want to say this as a little bit of a sneak peek, a new book. It's in German. I'll talk about more about that in soon, but here's the cover. There we go. That's your sneak book for now. You'll have to wait for later in the show that I'll talk about that a bit more. Vulcan or Victor? Oh, come on, it's Vulcan. What is this question even? I mean, Victor is great. Vulcan, amazing. Yes. So Justin, what have you been up to? I understand that I'm talking a lot here myself.
That's fine. Well, I have the day off, so I decided to finally show up on a stream. I haven't done a live stream in a very long time. Probably the last time I did a live stream would have been when I was very briefly considering live streaming World of Warships like 6 years ago.
You were good at that game.
Because I was good at that game.
No, like seriously, chat, you don't understand how good Justin was and his brother. There's something in the Pike family genes with World of Warships where if you had those two on the team, it would be an auto win 95% of the time. Honestly, if you find their usernames, look it up. Like the win rates, the accuracy, the kill claim, the kill count. It's just what is it in your brain, Justin, that made you into a World of Warships pro?
I have no idea. It was slow enough paced that I could probably keep up with it. I don't have like the highest APM craziness. It was more about thinking ahead, which I'm pretty good at. But yeah, I stopped playing like 6 years ago or 6 years ago, like right before submarines, because I was like, this is a bad design decision, and I love this game, and I stopped playing, and I have nothing but fond memories. I have no idea what's happened in the last 5 years.
I can tell you what's happened in the last 5 years because I've played it, as Andy has told us, 110 days ago. I had
Oh,
a brief
right, yeah.
game. Well, I had a couple of games. Honestly, the submarines didn't annoy me too much, but I also only had like 10 games, so whatever. I mainly just went out with the derpits and did what derpits thing people do, and that's derp around. But the thing about saying like that it's slow paced, that it's more about thinking ahead and how you're maneuvering your ships and positioning vis-a-vis the enemy is an interesting one, because I was talking to somebody else about war games and naval war games specifically, and they take a certain like skill set in like knowing how a battlefield is going to shape itself, and how the different ships are going to be positioned two, three, five steps ahead of the adversary in order to get into a good position. That is a skill that you had, and I was just following along. Yes, so there's that.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I came crawling back to War Thunder after that.
don't we all? Don't we all?
Don't we all? We can't escape.
No. War Thunder is good fun with friends, and if you just accept the craziness and the
Yeah.
confines of that game, that it's a big arena. It's
Hmm.
then it's a good game. I have recently played cards though, and I'm
Oh,
really
yes, you were
enjoying
telling
that.
me.
Yes, I'm really enjoying that as a like quick break uh, between work. Like honestly, just have a match, 15 minutes maximum, um, and just clear your mind, and then go back to work. It's good. It's good fun.
Yeah,
It's
other
really
than
good
that,
fun.
I can actually show you what I've been reading. I'll go grab it. It'll take a second.
Yes, I
I'll be
actually
right back.
also have some books here. Yeah, yeah. Right, chat. While Justin is gone, tell me your conspiracy theories surrounding Justin Pike. Also, I think he has his new headset on, so he
Yeah, I
probably
can hear
can
you.
hear. Oh no!
I'm up in the master bedroom, but you can't hide from me.
Uh, Fat, you have not played a computer game on 15 years. The older I get, the less time I have myself. It's just yeah. So what have you been reading, Justin? Let's go into
Uh,
Airpower stuff.
yeah, so I am on volume, let's see if I can get it in frame, volume 6 of
Six,
South
yes.
Pacific Air War. This is goes up to March 43, so it ends basically with the Bismarck Sea.
Hmm.
I'm getting through most of the Bismarck Sea stuff. I got through the 3rd of March, which is some of you probably know was the big day for Bismarck Sea.
Hmm.
Um, and it was really interesting. It's been a long time since I've read a lot on the Bismarck Sea. It's pretty wild. It's kind of the first mass deployment of like strafers. So you know the A-20, the B-25, they originally weren't strafers, but then they decided to start experimenting with that, and this was the big debut. It also confused the Japanese, so they thought they were under torpedo attack, for example, and so they turned into the ships, which just lined up perfectly for strafing.
Yeah.
Um, just grim all around from the Japanese side. But yeah, it's been really, really interesting. And for anyone who's not familiar with this series, I highly, highly recommend it. It's kind of the gold standard right now. A lot of the information that I will put into videos often will be probably from something by Michael Claringbold or Peter Ingman or a handful of others, because there are some of the very few that are extensively using Japanese records. Um, like in this case, they have pretty much, I think, they have like all of the operational records and things from pretty much every single Japanese air unit, plus, of course, multiple official histories and diaries and things like that. Um, and it really creates a very full picture account that you can't really get elsewhere without using those sources.
Yeah, that series is really good by Michael Claringbold. And I mean the amount of stuff that he's bringing out anyway chronologically is really helpful to just sort of get a big picture, and a lot of granularity as well with that sort of stuff, which hasn't really been available in the English speaking historiography
Yeah.
for a long while.
And it's a very
Um,
nerdy thing, but structurally speaking, I love them because you've got like the standard narrative stuff, and then it's
yeah.
like I just want to know what was shot down on a given day, and you just go to the appendix and it just shows it there, so you don't have to reread 20 pages where you're trying to find when it was shot down. Um, there's lots of other great books out there, but they usually don't have an appendix like that, so you have to do a lot of rereading.
A
Um,
good appendix and a good like index are so important, and it's really sad when sometimes when publishing houses skimp on that.
mhm.
And what's even worse is when they skimp on footnotes. and they
Yes.
use endnotes. And what's even worse than that is when they skimp on the endnotes and they just have a bibliography, a generic bibliography, and you're just like,
Yes.
okay, so I can basically not check any of this information. Great stuff. Cool.
Exactly. Which is one downside, I will say.
Oh, is it? I
Very,
don't
very
remember.
common though with
Yeah.
um, Asia Pacific Air War stuff
Okay.
from the more specialized authors. Um, I wish things would be better. But
It's still like from like somebody like Michael Clarenbold, you know where the information is basically
yeah,
coming from.
yeah,
Whereas when you then go to other publishing houses, where it's just like, is there really a peer review process here? Where is that information coming from? All of this, or like a lot of this, seems to be rehashed from like the 70s and 80s,
yeah.
with some new bits thrown in between. Yeah, it can be quite different, in that sense. Yeah. Uh, but what's your next book project to read after that?
I might have to, depending on how things go, I might have to start something on Malaya Air Campaign
Yes.
because I have to learn, I remember things. I've recently finished finally sitting down and reading all of Bloody Shambles, which I'd put off for like 10 years
Hmm.
because I've had it for at least that long. Um, and I know the Senshi Sosho for Japanese Army air operations in Malaya is actually translated. It's one of the only volumes that is, so I might start going through that. Not that it's an easy read, but I should start looking at it.
Now I have to get into that reading as well because I mean we've talked about this so many times, but for years now I've been planning to make a Malaya video about explaining why the Japanese air, well, then the Army Air Service was so effective there. And I've always been pushing it off, and now, hint, hint to the chat, there's another opportunity here that we have perhaps something to like a chat with Jonathan Parshall. We'll do sort of a roundtable discussion. That's the main aim right now, and then have that on the channel, and then later on maybe a sort of an executive summary video as well. So that's the basic concept that I'm working on right now. We'll see where that goes. Regarding the strafers, by the way, what was sort of the Japanese? Does he talk about what the Japanese like later on said about these A-20s, the B-25s coming in with their 50 cows?
Yeah, I haven't gotten to it yet, so I'm kind
Okay.
of still in the midst of it in the chapter. I kind of wonder what their thoughts will be.
Hmm.
I can't recall off the top of my head if I've ever seen a Japanese opinion on them. It's probably going to be pretty good, as in they're really damaging. Because I'm kind of a stand for low-level attacks, I guess much like a lot of the 5th Air Force. They were really generally doing a lot of the damage, like bullfighters as well, doing lots of low-level strafing and things like that. Um, the high-level stuff is very much mixed
Hmm.
bag. But
Are you telling me that high-level bombing doesn't work against ships and maneuvering targets?
yeah, not particularly effective. Or if you're trying to use like a B-17 in a low-level role because it's all you have, and then they're
Yeah.
like the results are like, sometimes it works,
Hmm.
sometimes it doesn't.
You really
You
have
know.
to like line up yourself way in advance in order to get like the bombs anywhere close to target, which is an experience that basically every country had to go through during the war, whether that's in Europe, in the Mediterranean, or in the Pacific. It's weird because like the closest approximation that I have when I want to do this is a video game, right? And
Mm,
there it works. Like, oh yes, like, oh yeah, I see the targets. Like, oh, I'll just align my bombers, drop the bombs from low altitude, and I'll be fine. Reality doesn't work that way. And I think anybody who has a bit of flying experience with like light aircraft and so on, trying to spot things on the ground when you don't know that general area, like the little details, the little targets, yeah, it's quite difficult. Plus, like maneuvering a big B-17 into position just a couple of 100 meters ahead of the target, that's not gonna work.
yeah.
In War Thunder it works, but it doesn't work in reality. They've tried.
No. Yeah. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Tom, how are you doing? Yeah, so to talk a little bit about what I am reading right now, um, you'll notice one, Justin. It's an old favorite.
Mm.
Let's see at what point you get it as I slowly lift it into the camera.
Oh.
It's probably like, is it mirrored? Anyway, yeah. Zero Eagles of Mitsubishi, Hirokoshi. Uh, I'm rereading it. because me and the other half want to watch The Wind Rises again. So I'm just
Mm.
like required reading before that movie. And I'm starting to pick like I'm remembering a lot of details that I have absorbed the first time when I read it, but I didn't really remember from sort of the primitive testing conditions that they had initially over to some of the problems that they had with the the mass balances on the ailerons plus the structural integrity and so on and so on. It's really fascinating to read again. I
Mhm.
just got to the part where what is it? Where Germany declares war on the Soviet Union, and he's like, should we be allied to these people?" It's just like, I can't remember what he says then a couple of months later, but we'll see. The other book I'm reading, so yeah, Eagles of Mitsubishi, I'm more reading for sort of for pleasure. The other one that I'm reading a little bit more for research, which has nothing to do with the channel right now, is Tim Ripley's 16 Air Assault Brigade. About, of course, 16 Air Assault Brigade, flying Chinooks, as well as, the Apaches are sort of added to it with 1st Aviation Brigade, about air assault in the British Army, which is quite interesting. Goes into a lot of things that I didn't know about how to get paratroopers to an area and what sort of the planning procedures are, what some of the often forgotten details are, where the paratroopers end up in an area and you didn't send them live ammunition because it was all the way down on the priority list for some reason, and they're just standing there like, well, we've got bayonets, I guess. So yeah, that's quite interesting. And then, of course, final check is now happening with the new book, Mythos Stuka, neue Forschungsergebnisse zur Junkers U-87. And if everybody's like, why is he talking German? Yes, the book is in German. It is going to come out in about 2 to 3 weeks' time, and it features a chapter by yours sincerely, Christoph Bergs, that's me, uh, on the Stuka accuracy during World War II. Roman Töppel, who needs no introduction, he's one of the most eminent historians about the Second World War, especially for the Eastern Front on the German side. And he also recently brought out the first volume of Erich von Mansteim's diary, plus a lot of information that comes with that. So that's really interesting. And then the two other chapters by Jens Wehner, also on the Stuka. And that's going to come out in German first, and then the aspiration is to get that translated into English and then bring it out in English for everybody. But the reason why it comes out in German first is because, well, we have Roman Töppel, we have Jens Wehner. They're in Germany, they speak German, they write everything in German. So we did that first, and my article, my chapter, worst comes to worst, I can still translate it myself and then just publish it somewhere else with some updates, some added details here and there. So yeah, those are the 3 books that I'm currently reading or working on.
Okay. Oh,
Yes.
Cannon Fodder put in the chat there, just basically, if the Japanese had better AA on their ships, it might not have worked out as well. Yeah, so that's one of the main conclusions that came up in or comes up in this book, and I imagine probably others that basically the transports had virtually no anti-aircraft weapons in the Bismarck Sea. Like there's one transport had like 2 rifle-caliber machine guns. The troops on deck were ordered to fire back with their rifles. A couple others had like a couple scattered mounts. They might have at least 1 or 2 might have had even old pom-poms, which I guess for people who don't necessarily know, the Japanese Navy along before the war operated the pom-pom. That's actually what the Type 96 replaced. And those were still floating around in the Navy, so they got fitted to some transport ships, but a very anemic armament. And one other thing that Michael Claringvold and Peter Ingman point out is that based on Allied accounts, the convoy was strung out over it's like 20 kilometers or something. There was no
Okay.
mutual support
Yeah.
whatsoever from the ships. And also it stretched the Japanese cap around as well because it's too
Which is
big.
really common
Mm.
during this time. Like the ships are just stretched out across a long distance, and there's accounts from nice mug. There's accounts from the like the fighting on the Channel, initially the Kanalkampf, before the Battle of Britain, and also after the Battle of Britain, where British ships that were basically traveling the route through the Thames estuary were traveling in a convoy, and then suddenly one ship was missing, and they couldn't figure out why, and that's because it got bombed or torpedoed or something, usually bombed, but nobody saw it. Like nobody just saw it. It's like a ship that this convoy is probably strung out also over miles and miles and miles, and it's really bizarre. Like bad, like somewhat bad weather conditions in one area obscure the views in another, and so on and so forth. It's just weather, right? Um, and I went through quite a few files in the TNA to figure out what exact amount of tonnage was sunk on some of these days, because I have the German claims, right? And one of the German claims is that on three separate days in November 1940, Stukas were sinking British merchant shipping in the Thames estuary. And the claim was by the commander of this unit that they sank about 80,000 tons of shipping by having individual ketten, so three Stukas go after individual ships. I go through TNA, I go through all the files for those days. I find one ship that was sunk, 1,250 tons. So we're missing basically 79,000 tons of shipping that was claimed. But nobody saw this ship getting sunk. It missed. Like it was missing, and later on, like a patrol went out, I think found the wreckage or something is partially submerged and so on. It's really bizarre. Like nowadays, I don't think we quite understand sort of the scale of this conflict, even on a tactical level, and how information is not at our fingertips the way we expect it nowadays, with having been living in a society where any sort of piece of information you need at any point in time you get on your phone. It's that's not war. There's friction, there's fog of war, it's an imperfect situation, and you often don't know what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just
Oh,
going
there's
through the
another
chat
AA
here as well.
question here.
Yes. There was one about a comment here by Lucio about Luftwaffe basically sinking a Royal Navy destroyer on the way losing naval bombing, but the ship was cooperating. Same thing happened in the Pacific with a Japanese destroyer captain basically looking up, seeing these B-17s coming towards him, and he's like, they never hit anything before. And then that's the one DD that gets hit by American B-17s, but that does not make the American B-17s good anti-shipping planes. It's one of those weird examples of where something worked even though it shouldn't. And actually, it's the exception that proves the rule in many ways. Modern drone warfare seems a lot of this is repeating regarding sub 30 millimeter caliber AA. So yes, in terms of drone warfare, if you go for a caliber of sort of 20, like counter UAV, if you go for a caliber of 20 to 30 millimeters, a hard kill variant, maybe with something like a proximity round, that is your best bet of shooting down drones, and in quick succession as well. It's not as weather dependent as some other solutions like lasers. And it is also not sort of the soft kill version that you have with electronic warfare. You just see something pointed, have an acoustic sensor, maybe have a millimeter waveband radar, even though you don't want to be admitting. So you just acoustic sensor, slew on, electro-optical, laser pointer goes out, you've got the bearing, bang, it's gone. That's all you need against drones. That's all I'm going to say on this matter. Okay, so do you have anything to add on that? Or anything I said?
I can see the Japanese Navy AA question, which I can talk about a little bit, because I know it comes up surprisingly often on YouTube.
Yeah.
It's an interesting topic.
Is this the question by Sai?
Looks like Daniel and then Sci-Fi Dude's responding to him a little bit.
Okay.
Daniel Pickering is the original one there.
I'll just put it on the stream there.
Yeah, so here is a very, very quick rundown of this and a little bit of my personal opinion. So in overall sense, really quick, was Japanese Navy AA during the war not great, like compared to say the U.S. Navy, the Royal Navy? Yes, for a lot of reasons. Usually they had older fire control systems. Their radar was far less sophisticated when they had it at all. Um, One of the main things I think with the Type 96, which is the gun that gets the most hate, that's the 25 millimeter that they got from the French. Um, it was fine. I want to make this clear. It was perfectly fine when they got it in the mid 1930s. It was old already by 1941. And I think the main reason people will always get into really specific technical issues with it, the excessive vibration, the limited magazine capacity, although that's actually far less of a problem than people think. It was overcome with training on the twin and the triple mounts. This isn't discussed very often, but I had to actually look this up. You have two pedal triggers, and you can fire at least on the twin one, you can fire only one gun. You can basically keep up on a twin mount with proper training, continuous fire. So isn't the same interruption of fire that people would assume. Um, and one other thing to underline here is that I think the main problem with the Type 96 is that it was not a good light anti-aircraft weapon and it wasn't a good medium anti-aircraft weapon. So ideally, you'd want roughly for a good medium, somewhere between like 37 and 45 millimeter tends to
Yeah,
be where most of them fall.
yeah.
The Bofors is the most famous, but there's lots of other actually quite good examples in that range.
Bofors is all you need.
Yep. Um,
It's just the best medium flak weapon there is.
so the 25 millimeter, it's too small really to be a truly effective medium anti-aircraft gun.
Mhm.
But then you're like, okay, well, it's a light anti-aircraft gun then. It's like I've stood next to a Type 96. um, they are not light anti-aircraft guns. They're
Mhm.
huge. They are way bigger than a 20 millimeter Oerlikon. Um, and I've actually found footage of them using the single mounts they start putting all over everything in their ships during the war. Um, and it is beyond awkward. Like
Mm.
you can't like mount it on your shoulders or anything like that, like a 20 millimeter Oerlikon. It's like they're holding it around their waist and they're kind of like awkwardly swinging it around, and it's just huge and totally unwieldy. Um, and I think that pretty much undermines the gun way more than any of the technical uh, little problems with it. Those are still factors, but I think that's the big thing. Is this is just an awkward gun. It was too big
Yeah.
for to be light and too small to be medium. is what really, and they have nothing to back it up really. Um, on the heavy side, they average from okay to great, except that the great mounts were not on a whole lot of ships. So that'd be the
Mm.
Type 98 100 millimeters. Those were very new guns that were very capable. They were entirely comparable to a 5-inch 38 in the U.S. Navy, but they weren't on that many Japanese warships. Most of them were using the old Type 89, which is, I think, from the late 1920s. Um, Good gun for the time. By the time you get to 1941, it was aging. So it has like kind of middling performance, not the worst, but really, yeah, the dependence on the Type 96 is what really I think cements the reputation of Japanese anti-aircraft as being not very good, rightfully so, during the war.
I mean, also to underline this in terms of bad AA, basically every country starts with bad AA on their ships because none of them have really factored in the volume of fire you need for point defense, both on at long range to break up a formation or something, and then have uh, medium caliber AA, which basically can dispatch a plane with one shot still, or has the capacity to do so, generally speaking, and then just having the amount of volume of fire at lower range in order to at least guarantee some hits that hopefully take that ship down at the last stage, especially when it's a torpedo bomber. So if you look at just the refits of light cruisers in the Royal Navy. The reason I bring this up is because I once made that video about the Belfast. Right, you start out with these incredibly weak anti-aircraft defenses that are, for the most part, the guns are also just completely up to par and awkward, like you say, and too heavy for what they actually provide. And then suddenly, when you're just like, oh no, planes are a problem, you start to augment and you start to modernize all these guns to the point where you then, yeah, or like on a U.S. Navy ship, if there's a little bit of deck space that you don't need, slap an Oerlikon on it, because what else, anybody can fire it basically at that point.
Yeah.
Probably at that point, if you need to fire your Oerlikons, everybody should be firing. Yeah, because it's either like a torpedo bomber getting really close to the point where they will probably hit you, or a kamikaze plane. So yeah, the German flag is quite interesting, I think, just because I saw the comment there by Sai. So a 1-to-1 basis, like the problem with the 37 mm that the Germans had, is that basically just one step up from that, there's the 40 mm Bofors, which is the best medium AA gun of the war, and you cannot beat that. And it's basically co-equivalent caliber. There's a small difference there, and you get some marginal benefits from the 40 mm. But what they did do well is 20 mm, and the 37 mm was good enough for the time initially to do the job that it was meant to do. And if you look at the way they had integrated the Luftwaffe flak units, the flak Regimente, into being attached to the panzer divisions in these specific army corps that were maintaining the offensive, especially going into France, that's where you see the true value coming out of that, because everywhere where the panzers go, you have AA, and the Allies were completely unprepared for that. And if you have these flak regiments, 3 or 4 motorized, being able to follow that advance, install a couple of flak guns at critical intersections, critical bridges, and so on and so forth, hold those positions, and dissuade any air attack on them, you're really going to be in the advantage compared to the adversary, who didn't do anything of that. The French didn't really have any proper AA. The Brits didn't have any real proper AA, especially with the maneuvering forces at the time. That's a big factor that we sometimes talk about, especially with the bridges at Sedan. But what was really important is that the guns then kept moving with the advance. So yeah. Would it have been, in hindsight, it would have been better to have adopted the upgraded pom-pom instead of jumping to the 25 mm that does neither that well? This is a question that I'm going to give to you.
I mean, yeah. I don't know if so. I'm not like super well read on the background of the what is it like the high velocity pom pom. I don't know when the British developed it exactly, and probably they would have not sold it to the Japanese. But yeah, I think the Japanese needed to probably look into something in that 37 to 45 mm range, like because they just didn't have a medium anti-aircraft gun. Not even in the land forces either. So like their land-based anti-aircraft, they have a few pretty capable guns, big guns that are like emplaced, particularly later in the war. But for the most part, their actual maneuvering forces, it's like 75 mm from the 1920s, and the Army had 20 mm. I don't know off the top of my head how kind of stacked up to other 20 mm. Probably not world leading. I don't know. I haven't seen people complaining about it as much, like in sources and things, so it probably performed better than the Navy's Type 96 for its job, but it wasn't nothing special. But they didn't have an intermediate. They tried to reverse engineer the Bofors, and it never got anywhere, interestingly. I don't know enough about the mechanics of what are effectively guns to comment too strongly about why, other than I know they were running into manufacturing issues, and it just like they never got their reverse engineered Bofors into production. They did use captured ones to defend certain locations, but yeah.
There's a question here also from Lucio. The Kriegsmarine, the 37, was semi-auto, which was useless. The Heer's 37 was good. I assume the Luftwaffe's 37 was attached to the Heer. Is that what you mean? Why did they not replace the former aboard ships? So, I'm not a Kriegsmarine historian. I'll put that out there. And so I don't exactly know what's going on here. My intuitive feeling is that maybe the semi-auto wasn't considered to be that detrimental to the employment of that gun, specifically because it may reduce the amount of ammo that's being fired. Now that sounds a bit counterintuitive because obviously you just want to go guns blazing and shoot anything down that you see. But if you look at the German flak units throughout the war, especially starting sort of 1942, especially on heavy AA guns, they're being told to artificially decrease their rate of fire in order not to blow through too much ammunition because the constant problem of any sort of army is that there's never enough ammunition for what you actually need. But specifically here, the 88s and the 1005s, sorry, the 10.5s, the ammo supply just wasn't guaranteed. So maybe that plays a role where they just like actually this stops us from blowing out all our ammunition immediately. And that's not necessarily like a theoretical concern. If you look at some of the task forces, the British task forces from the Royal Navy that were sent to around Cyprus, sorry, around Crete and Greece, when they got under air attack by German aircraft, say 3 or 4 progressive waves throughout the day, usually by wave 2, maybe wave 3, they started to be low on ammunition, so that they had to decrease their rate of fire. They had to wait for the planes to come closer before they started opening fire. And admittedly, that's based on one sortie being attacked throughout the day, but that's exactly what can happen to ships as they navigate through certain corners or certain areas. So the Royal Navy would definitely send out a lot of planes against any sort of German ships that tries to break out from the north coast into the Atlantic. So you're in the Atlantic and you don't have any sort of ammunition anymore. Also, what did the Germans ever do with the destroyer fleet, right? Or like their fleet, generally speaking, like all those resources, Justin, and all those people could have been used by the Luftwaffe. Germany doesn't need a navy. No. Would Germany have been better off getting a license for the Bofors 40 mm for both the Kriegsmarine and Luftwaffe? I mean, at this point, you're talking like benefits in the margins. I mean, they did use some Bofors. You're talking about benefits in the margins here, I think. Some compatibility with ammunition if they capture ammunition stocks by the Allies. But even then, like actually, if you look at the way the war progressed, that would have been more in the benefit of the Allies rather than the Germans. So, yeah. Another question about the Japanese here. So also, we are an aviation channel, and everybody's talking about air defense. It's like, what the heck is going on?
They shoot
Can
at
we?
things that fly.
Yeah, well, we don't want that, Justin. We don't want it.
They can't shoot back. That's not fair.
Right, can you talk about the Army's 20 mm Hole 5 and the Navy Type 99, and why Japanese have a 50 cal HE? Okay, so let's bracket that last part off for later, but let's maybe first talk about the 20 mm Hole 5 and the Type
Yeah,
99.
so the Hole 5, for those who don't know, is an upscaled Browning, mechanically. So it's a 20 mm Browning. By reputation from the reference works I have, it was a very good aircraft cannon with one major caveat, and that is by the time it started being produced, that was around the time in the war where material shortages and things are starting to degrade certain productions. So the on-paper specs for it working under pristine conditions, very, very good 20 mm aircraft cannon. However, there would be issues where manufacturing issues where they had to like restrict the rate of fire and things like that for the mechanical reliability. Now the Type 99 comes up a lot more in discussions. So you've got the Type 99-1, which is an Oerlikon FF. So it's a short barrel Oerlikon, basically 20 mm. Great aircraft cannon for its time. The way I kind of characterize it is because it's one of the earlier examples. I don't think it's the earliest. There's got to be stuff that's earlier, but it's one of the earlier examples of a 20 mm that you can fit in a plane. It has all of the advantages of being early and that like you're among the first, but also the downsides being that you were first. So there's other stuff that comes along later that ends up being better in a lot of ways. The nicest thing I can say about the Type 99 is it was stupendously reliable. So other countries, they have on paper what are very good 20 millimeter cannons, but then they have to put a lot of effort into making them reliable. Looking at you, Hispano. Um, Whereas in the case of the Type 99, it was reliable. Pretty much, I can't actually, it's got to have happened, but I can't think of a specific example of a stoppage in combat for the Type 99. I'm sure it had to happen, but it was so rare that I can't even think of an example. Um, Beyond that, like they improve it through the war. There's a whole lot of different marks. Kaz, who's kind of really knows his Japanese stuff, he made me a beautiful chart of all of the different Type 99 marks, like increased rate of fire, increased velocity, belt fed, not all these different improvements. The Type 99-2 is the higher velocity one, which I think is probably the most significant because one of the main issues with the Type 99-1 is that it was quite a low velocity cannon. It was hard to use, particularly for the kind of deflection shooting and stuff that the Japanese Navy pilots like doing. So there were a lot of early complaints where the more experienced Navy pilots usually scored the bulk of their zero kills with the 7.7 millimeter machine guns because they were used to those, and these like 20 millimeters that had pretty modest rate of fire and low velocity were annoying to use. But the complaints kind of start going away. It's kind of the old grandpas that were used to only having 2 rifle caliber machine guns being like, well, this cannon's different from what I'm used to. But once newer pilots start getting in there and getting used to the 20 millimeters, they like them. But yeah, that's kind of my quick rundown on that. Now the HE thing, you can chime in because I thought of that immediately. Well, Japan is not alone when it comes to that.
Italy, the
Yeah.
Germans. I mean, everybody kind of tried it, right? You've got experimental versions of like high explosive rounds. I'm pretty sure also for the 50 cal. I have to look exactly into it, so don't nail me down on this. But basically, in my mind, it's to a recognition that 250 cals, which most of these planes had, the Italian planes had basically 250 cals or equivalents. The Japanese army had a lot of that. It's basically admitting, okay, we cannot add too many guns into our plane. Space requirements, also where you got to put the ammunition and so on. So the balance is we're going to have 250 cals. That's all we can fit, usually in the cowling above the engine, firing synchronized through the propeller. But we're going to augment that firepower by having a small high explosive filler with our 50 cal, which in my mind doesn't really sound effective, and I don't really think it's effective. It's not a very good solution. But we also know that generally speaking, 450 cals on the American fighters, for example, were considered insufficient to tackle even fighters. Yes, you have more ammo. Yes, you have more stopping power than your 303s and so on. But you really need 6, ideally 8, to dispatch an enemy fighter very quickly, and bombers the same thing. So, in order to keep yourself in the fight and not having to unduly add additional weight with a 20 millimeter on your aircraft and so on, I can see the argument why they went with that. It's not a very good one. I think they should have just gone with 20 millimeters anyway, and I think for example with the Key 43s they did that. Because
Experimentally, yeah.
yeah, but like if you're not going to be dispatching planes all very quickly, even with 250 cals that are firing HE rounds, because the explosive effect is just not there. But then again, look at the Germans. I mean, the Germans with their 20 millimeter mine shell with it has 18 grams of high explosive filler. That's way above what anybody else had. And it's only one way of destroying an aircraft, and it's basically you just interface, you penetrate just slightly through the skin, explode, create a lot of damage that way. Whereas you can also do similar types of damage, or not similar types of damage, but you can similar dispatch of an aircraft by firing something like an APHE, which or semi armor piercing HE, which the Hispanos had, where you penetrate a little bit further into the aircraft and then you explode, aiming to basically destroy the internal components of the aircraft rather than just surface skin layer. Both work. But basically, what World War II has shown in my mind is for an aircraft gun, you want 20 millimeter or above. You don't want to go crazy either, but sort of between 20 to 30 millimeter is good. And eventually, that's the route that anybody took anyway, because it gives you rate of fire and the damage in one or two hits that is sufficient in order to at least significantly damage the enemy plane in most cases, or to dispatch it if we're talking about fighter aircraft here. So that's what you want, and that has gone all the way into modern aviation as well, where most of these guns are around that caliber. Also, on your point about old pilots not liking something new, the point that I have made repeatedly and that you have made in the past as well, I believe, is pilots are sometimes the worst people to ask of what they want. Now, before the hate starts, let me just give you an example. Armor, right? You'd think that a pilot would want armor in a plane because it keeps them alive. Well, the thing is, armor is heavy, so a lot of pilots were like, I don't want armor because it makes my plane more sluggish, and my survivability depends more on my ability to have rapid maneuvers in my aircraft and outperform the enemy fighter that way, rather than having a saving throw behind me with an armor plate or in front of me with a windscreen. Now, all these pilots very quickly change their tune when armor is forced upon them, and the very next, or the two sorties from that time when they fly in an aircraft with armor plating, that armor plating saves their life, and from then on, it's like a must. Like, yes, give me armor plating behind me, give me armor plating in front of me. Almost to the point where maybe it becomes like some people ask for more additional armor that really wouldn't help that much. So yeah, sometimes like if you're the person that is in the job, sometimes you're just used to the way that certain things work and you have accepted the risk that comes with that, and you really have to see the difference that new equipment, new methods, new techniques, and new tactics bring before you actually accept them. Where we can go back to the Japanese Army Air Service and turn fighting versus boom and zooming. Now that's an
Yeah,
interesting discussion.
yeah, that's and like on this specific note, directly related to it, it's something that the historian John Lundstrom was probably the first to ever point out and pretty much the only one to have ever done so. And there's probably a lot more to explore here for somebody with the language skills. Is I've talked at length before about how the Japanese Navy Air Service, from a pretty, like basically from the war in China, had a preference for hit and run, maneuver in the vertical. It wasn't all low speed turn fighting. But then they end up with the Zero, which is, of course, a famous exceptional low speed turn fighter that they were not generally using that way. And John Lundstrom, in his book, The First Team, he points out it's very interesting how the Japanese Navy Air Service pilots were pushing for an aircraft that they were then not using in its most optimal way. For example, that they had a preference for deflection shooting, they had a preference for these higher speed hit and runs and vertical maneuvers, but then they had a plane that wasn't ideally suited to that. And the most John Lundstrom went into it is he's just like, this is how they're fighting. This is the plane, the Zero as it is that they were demanding. Well, although there were still complaints it wasn't maneuverable enough initially. And it's kind of interesting that there's a mismatch there between what they want and what they were actually doing with the plane.
I mean, even Jiro Hirokoshi talks about this with the Navy, of that there being arguments about how to not just like develop, but what sort of attributes that plane should have. So yeah, I just want to say a shout out here to GTT Goder for his donation or super chat. I don't know what's available right now on YouTube. I'm completely out of it. But thank you very much there, chat. If you could also thank please GTD Coder, for that donation. And also there is a poll in the chat, basically me asking where you're watching from. Currently Europe is winning, so the Americas, where you all at. I know it's middle of the day there, and that's part of the reason why this information is important, because I want to figure out where people are watching from and what sort of times are good to tune into, so I can figure out, am I going to do this like on Sundays? Am I going to do this on Fridays every now and then? That is just information that's really helpful, because I don't like starting these sort of streaming things without having some sort of consistency, which has been an issue in the past, and knowing when people are on can help with that decision. In most video game depiction, mostly all Japanese planes are light turn fighting and can't keep their energy up. Are there any divergences from that? There are a lot of divergences from that. Uh,
Yeah,
Justin.
primarily on the army side when you're looking on the earlier side of the wars. So even right from some of the earliest air campaigns against the Western Allies, there's an experimental unit of Key 44s. The Key 44, I think it's a allied code name is Tojo, of all things. I don't know why. But the Key 44 was basically a big, heavy fighter. It was an interceptor, designed as an interceptor. Had a very good rate of climb. Um, and it was still respectably maneuverable because of the development of butterfly combat flaps that were kind of the Japanese, Nakajima specifically, invented. But it was kind of the heavier, harder hitting, fast climbing, good energy retention compared to the Key 43, which is like the most, I've gotten into this before, but the most extreme lightweight monoplane fighter of the war. It's the Key 43-1 is wild, but the Key 44 is that heavier counterpart. Um, and I'm trying to remember from memory how many they produced, like a couple thousand, like a respectable number for Japan. Um, and it saw service mostly in like China, and then it started eking into things. I want to say they deployed some in the Philippines, um, but it was, in my opinion, it's a better fighter than the Key 43, and the Army probably should have just leaned into the Key 44 and not bothered with the Key 43. And if you wanted a lighter fighter with respectable low speed maneuverability, the Zero is right there, and just procure the same damn plane. Um, it just wasn't going to happen. But but that's my hot take, is that the Key 44 really should have been the Army's primary fighter. It was basically ready to go only a few months after the Key 43 was. There
Yeah.
was an experimental unit fighting in Burma with Key 44s. And it was a respectable plane, and it had legs. One tiny myth I'll quash with it, because somehow it's made its way into certain English language books where they're like, the Key 44 was just a Key 43 with a bomber engine. It was not. They were two parallel design teams at Nakajima. It was a completely different plane. It did share an engine with the Key 49 bomber, but yeah, different plane. And quite good. That's my very quick review of the Key 44. Now, there's lots of other Japanese examples as well. Of course, the Key 84 from later in the war, the J2M, the N1K2J. That one is still a little bit more of a turn fighter, honestly. It's just a respectable speed. Key 61, another respectable one when its engine was behaving. And the Key 100 can be lumped in there when it got a reliable engine. But yeah, there are examples. It's just the main line ones, the Key 43 and the A6M, both of them were not outstanding energy fighters. They were pretty light. So
A couple of questions here in the chat, and some of them are big picture and some of them small picture. First of all, big thank you also to Mark Bodovic for his donation. Thank you very much in there. And I also see your channel supporters, so thank you for that ongoing support. If you are in the chat and if you haven't done the poll yet, I see 80 votes from 93 people that are watching. It's actually really cool to see close to 100 people here in the chat. Do make sure that you cast that final vote. Just to give me some more information of where you're all from for future streams. Now, then into the questions again. There was a cool question about, imagine you are the Netherlands in 1940. Which aircraft did you purchase to defend the Dutch Indies? Now, I think I have my answer.
Okay. I don't have one, so
You don't have one?
I'm trying to think like because what was for sale? That's the
Buffaloes. Look, they had the B339. It was
yeah.
the Buffalo was a good plane
Yeah.
for the time. It was not out of date. Was it a bit heavy? Yes, but that also depended on what modifications you put in there. And theoretically, it's a good choice because in theater you have the Americans as well. So
Mm.
you theoretically have a logistic support line and the Brits with their own Buffaloes, which adds what we would nowadays say is a little bit of interoperability. But again, it feeds sort of in the logistical support chain that theoretically could be tapped into. Now, I'm just stretching here with my imagination a little bit because during World War II, it really wasn't the case that countries shared their spare parts just that willingly. But honestly, the Buffaloes were already available. They had them. It was a good plane. And what killed the Buffalo in Southeast Asia is not the Buffalo. It's the logistic support infrastructure. It's the fact that there are no reserves. It's as I think Christopher Shores called it in Bloody Shambles, like a a shopping window dressed to impress, enough nothing behind it, right?
Mm.
Um, and you're losing airfields left, right, and center. But for the most part, at least the army in Malaya is fighting outdated fighters, which are of an older generation than the Buffaloes. Now, the Dutch are probably going to start running into zeros.
Hmm.
So that has to be taken into account. So if you were to do some future scoping, Wildcats, if you could get them in 1940, I mean, it's, the U.S. Navy wasn't even, didn't really
Yeah.
properly
Wouldn't they
have
enter
them at that
service the
point,
end of
did
that
they?
year? I think.
Yeah, I think so. But I mean, they have first pick anyway, right?
Hmm.
Uh, P40, I don't think that's a good idea. Not that it's anything against the plane, although it would have probably added some performance over the Buffalo. Um, but yeah, I mean, you're going up against a zero, so your best chances are basically don't get into a dogfight. But
Yeah. Or
if you have
just
Buffaloes, I think it would have been like there is no optimal choice at that point in time.
yeah. Like the thing I can add is that like the problem wasn't so much the airframes; it was the context around them.
Yeah,
That uh, really gives it to the Allies initially. I think out of all of the areas that were hit in the initial strikes, the most threatening collection of Allied air power was in the Philippines, and I think it is an undying scandal how it was destroyed mostly on the ground.
yeah,
Because it was actually quite potent. I know there is nuance around that. It's like, oh, there's some of the planes were, and it's like, but that's actually a lot of stuff, and the Japanese were operating at very long range, which is a downside. And the potential was there for the Americans in the Philippines to cause a lot of trouble in the air. And then so much of it was destroyed on the ground right away. And then they were kind of forced onto the back foot for the rest of it. And that was, I would argue, a boon for the Japanese.
and it's
Um,
crazy how the Japanese don't learn from the mistakes of their adversaries because the exact same thing happens to them time and time again as the years go by. 1942, 1943, 1944, WWII Hollandia. We spoke about this in the past.
mm,
I mean, how can you lose an air fleet multiple times over to the same sort of stuff, which is
yep.
just low level parafrags? It's just, and it goes all the way into like, it doesn't really, yes, it matters what planes you have, but if you don't have the support infrastructure around that, if you don't have the early warning system around that, if you don't have, the command and communication system that allows you to quickly alert your fighters, get everything into the air, it doesn't matter if you have the greatest plane on the ground or not. Just think of the Gulf War, like the Iraqi Air Force.
Mm.
Yeah, it wasn't up to like what the coalition had, but it was dangerous. But they mainly stayed on the ground, except a couple of occasions, and they got destroyed there. It's just, it's yeah. Hang on, there were a couple of questions that I wanted to get into. Also, big thank you for everybody who casted their votes. We now have 115 people watching after 1 hour of streaming. Thank you very much. We have broken that magic barrier of 100 people, Justin. We can now celebrate. Yay!
Yay.
And yeah, since we are very outgoing people, that was all the chat is getting in terms of celebrations. Where are you watching from? The poll has just ended. 50% of you are from Europe, 43% of you are from the Americanas, and Oceania has narrowly beaten out East Asia as well, which is bizarre to be honest, because most of the stream I feel like we've been talking mainly about the Pacific, but the majority of our viewers are from Europe. So why are the Europeans not asking questions here? It seems like everybody else is. Um, what's going on? Are you guys sleeping over there? Or over here, rather? Well, it is getting late in Central Europe. Morning from New Zealand. Errol, how are you doing? Errol, by the way, who's in chat, if I remember correctly, and I don't misplace the name now with the avatar, I don't think I do. Aviation photographer who also allowed me to use pictures of a P-39 back in the
Oh,
day.
nice.
Is that correct, Errol? Please correct me if I get that wrong. But thank you very much for allowing me to do so. And then there were a couple of other questions. I need to scroll up in the chat now because lots of people have been posting, which is brilliant. Hang on. Justin, entertain chat for a second.
Here's my mug. It's
Ooh,
a I-16 in Chinese service, dogfighting and an A5M.
wow.
Very fancy.
Very
It's starting to get
fancy
worn out
indeed.
now, which is unfortunate. I need to stop putting it in the dishwasher.
Oh, you don't put your
I know, it's
mugs in your
dumb. I'm lazy
dishwasher?
though.
Such a Canadian. Uh, that made no sense, but you'll have to take it. Um, the Yeah, but the P-51 you're thinking of there is like a completely different one to the redesigned one. Um, Sorry, that was to Spirit of Montgomery. Uh, the first live stream I've managed to watch since the paper airplane in the museum. Geese, that was a fun stream. And yes, I think there were maybe two streams between then and now. So, do we have any information on the Tornado ECR in terms of capabilities? The thing I find odd is Germany does not consider the F-35 to have sufficient EW to replace it. Um, so anything that has to do with electronic warfare is highly classified. So you're always going to only find vagaries in terms of the actual capabilities that are in place on these sort of platforms. What I think Germany is basically looking at is also having the electronic attack capability, which is why they're going for Eurofighter EK in that sense, plus potentially additional platforms that can be used as stand-in sort of electronic attack. Um, so that's just the path they've chosen right now. Hi Chris, have you come across reports about Stuka operations over Malta? How did the Luftwaffe operate and how did it react to changes made by the RAF? So Jason, that's an interesting because I tried in the past to look into this, and beyond what is already in the literature about some of the sorties that are there, especially in terms of using Stukas against the convoys that were going towards Malta, as well as the attacks on HMS Indomitable and HMS Illustrious. The problem is that a lot of the files haven't survived. When you're researching the Luftwaffe, it is one big puzzle game because at the end of the war, an estimated 80 to 90% of the files were destroyed, either through Allied bombings or by a potentially misunderstood order that went out from Goering to have the files destroyed. And that resulted in us now having very limited actual information about the Luftwaffe, and which is why there's so many open questions still about this force. which is also why I find it really fascinating to now have that part as part of the Luftwaffe at war, because it allows me to go through all the basics again of the Luftwaffe and really helping myself understand what the force is all about. And that's when I start discovering all these sort of questions that haven't really been answered yet, or haven't really gotten out into the public yet in terms of answer. So that's that's not a real answer to what you have said, but at least I've responded to it. Why did the Imperial Japanese Army go to the length to buy German MG-151s?
Yes, I saw that question, and I am. So I can't remember specifics off the top of my head, but I'm almost certain some of the stuff I have has details. I know they arrived by submarine. I want to say partway through 43. I can't remember exactly what the rationale was for it, other than I think it predated the. Again, these are like dates that I can't fully remember. I can't remember when the Ho 5 actually showed up and entered production. So I think there was a period where the Army wanted 20 millimeters, but they didn't actually have a 20 millimeter aircraft cannon. And if you're like, well, but the Navy had, yeah, but they don't share. So I suspect that's probably part of the motivation. I'll see if I can find some more info within the next couple minutes here. But you can answer another one, Chris, while I'm taking a
Oh
poke
God,
around
yeah,
here.
answer another one. Suddenly, all the Europeans came out and they're like, Eurofighter, Eurofighter, talk about Eurofighter. It's like the channel is about history. I love Eurofighter, but the channel is about history. Um, Damn, it's expensive for Eurofighters are, that's for sure. Let's see. Okay, so Errol was in fact the correct Errol. Thank you very much again, Errol. Justin is a Canadian. Yes, he is. Where is he at? He is in Canada. Um, Unless you want to give your exact
My
address to
exact
the internet.
address, my postal code is no. I'm in Alberta, one of the provinces in Canada. Yes, Canada
Alberta.
has
What even is
provinces. Very
Alberta?
exciting. Yeah.
Is it? Does it have provinces because part of it used to be French?
I don't know what the origin is because we also have territories. We have provinces and territories.
Oh wow, it's just like the U.S. has states and commonwealths, but everybody calls them states. The commonwealths, that is. There are like three commonwealths in the U.S., aren't there? Um, as states. Am I making this up?
I'm not helping you here.
Wow, wow. Go and look for your little information on the MG-151. Uh, United States has commonwealths. We're going to ask the wisdom of the internet. Yes, Kentucky, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and Virginia.
Hmm.
There we go. The more you know. The US has commonwealths, not just states. Yes, in England we have counties. That is absolutely true.
Oh no, there's entire tables in here.
Well, that's what we want now.
I've definitely opened this book before.
Honestly, like it does happen that sometimes I buy like 3 or 4 books and then I like read two and then I forget that the other ones exist. And I go back to my bookcase and I'm like, oh,
Oh yeah, I
hello
have that.
there, old friend. I remember buying you. I don't remember having you though. So yeah, the U.S. has 3 commonwealths. Well, I'm also told that Kentucky is a commonwealth. Um, in 1942, the Royal Engineers had like 6 months backlog in terms of bomb disposal. Is that in Malta? I wonder how much personnel they had. But yeah, that is not a number that I necessarily would doubt, to be honest. Did the Japanese learn to adapt to ground radar when planning attacks against Allied air bases? So, um, as Justin is gone, even though he has, well, he's back. I'm gonna say my quick answer, but Justin can correct me, is that they didn't, mainly because the distances implied that you start within a certain a number of hours and you end up at the target within a certain amount of hours. So as soon as you figure out that sort of pattern, radar obviously big massive help to check on the actual approach path, but you roughly knew when the Japanese were going to arrive over certain areas if they had a strike coming out from Rabaul or something. So in that sense, no. Also in terms of like terrain hugging or like staying low, flying between canyons and so on, I have never heard about that. And considering the places that they were, for example, striking from Rabaul, since you're flying over open water anyway, and typically the radar stations would be positioned exactly in such a way that they could scan out, from the top of a hill, the area around them. I don't think that would have been possible. Justin.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
so what I
I've
said
been
was completely correct. Justin has
yes, sure.
confirmed it.
I've fully endorsed it. I was 100% paying attention to every word.
Excellent,
So
excellent.
one thing I found on the 151 is I was correct. It is because it
Okay.
wasn't. They didn't have a 20 millimeter. They wanted a 20 millimeter and they didn't have one available at the time.
But the
Um,
151 is not a 20 millimeter.
or the is my brain melting?
No, no. So
The
I'm being facetious here. The 151-20 is the 20 millimeter. The
oh my god.
151 is the 15 millimeter. That and it's like up calibered. Don't worry
Don't
about
melt my
this.
brain like that.
But if it's in terms of the Oerlikon, so the derivative, the MGFF, is that maybe the one that the Japanese got?
No, they got the proper
They
whatever it
got the
is.
proper gun.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
good.
I was seeing if they. I don't think Japanese aircraft equipment has anything, but let me just double check. But that's the short answer, anyways. They didn't have a 20
Yeah.
millimeter, and they wanted one for their Q-61s.
So for us, in hindsight, for me, the Focke-Wulf 187 was the better aircraft than the Bf 110. Why did the Germans choose Messerschmitt? Multiple reasons for this. My quick answer is the Messerschmitt was likely cheaper. That is difficult to say with like real data backing it up because the 187 never went into full scale production. But it is likely that part of the design, while theoretically we can argue about that, slightly worse than the 187, there are industrial factors, there's engines factors, there's availability factors, there's industrial capacity factors that make the 110 potentially the better candidate. So don't look at like the choice of an aircraft over another aircraft simply based on the performance index of these designs, but also look at it beyond that. So in terms of unit costs, what engines are they using? What is the capacity of the individual companies? And how did also Germany plan their industrial, how who gets what order and which company is going to be built up in order to then be this big manufacturing house in the future, and which one is getting kept smaller to build more auxiliary aircraft and so on and so forth. So in that case, it makes sense, for example, for the Germans to initially also say, well, we'll have one company that really goes into the fighter aircraft, we'll have one company that really goes into the bomber aircraft, and then we'll figure out with the other ones, some more niche capabilities that are being added to the force from them. The 110 was not considered a multi-role aircraft from the very start, Lucio. It was meant to be a full-on Zerstörer. There were considerations that this could become a multi-role aircraft, but the primary purpose was absolutely being a heavy fighter, being used to offensively go after the enemy's air force, destroy it both on the ground and in the air. On the ground, specifically by strafing. And it's only later on that they were like, well, we need to find a role in this. And obviously, bombs is fairly easy. So yes, that comes in quite early on because bomb racks and so on are not rocket science, and very likely part of the design process was already incorporating that. But the initial purpose behind the B and the C model was absolutely being a heavy fighter, with then very quickly repurposing it to multi-role and then a night fighter. And actually, as a night fighter, the 110 is really good. Yes, it is starting to show its age, and it's not as good again 1-on-1 compared to the Heinkel 219. But it does, from all the planes that start a war and fly until the very end, the 110 is unrecognized for actually providing the Germans with some capability there that went a long way. And it's the only reason why everybody sort of dunks on it is the Battle of Britain, which, fair enough, like, yeah, it performed rather poorly, and that's saying that, yeah, that's probably an understatement. Okay, so GTD coder. The real expert on this question, why the British take so long to have fuel injection, while the Germans had it in an early version in the 109, the real expert for this is Colin Douglas, who has appeared on the channel before. And if you look at the channel, at the video index, and look for like a video called "How One Decision Ruined British Aero Engines" or something. There, Colin Douglas explains it, but it basically comes down to like the carburetor engine in Britain with the Merlin was a really good engine, and the people in power, which came down to one person, were also the people who had been developing the carburetor for years and years and years to have a really, really strong and high performance engine. And it appears that the person who made the decision initially not to go for fuel injection may have done so primarily because they were the carburetor expert in Britain at the time and didn't want this fuel injection thing to suddenly surpass that. Now, that sounds a little bit conspiratorial, but it's also a very human story, I would say. But I would have to check again with Colin Douglas if he has found additional evidence that supports that or invalidates that. But that is sort of a part of the explanation that he gives in that video. For the rest, just watch that video. And yeah, yes, Rolls-Royce Merlin engine was the Spitfire engine, if we ignore the very early engines that were used on the Spitfire. I'm just gonna have to play catch up here with chat. Justin, have you seen anything that you want to respond to?
Maybe Griffia? Is there
Okay.
any way to make Japanese procurement make sense during the war? Division of effort must have hurt both the Army and Navy extremely. Yeah, that's probably one of the main issues that you see with Japanese aviation, like on the industrial side, and not even just in production, but in taxing design teams. Like they have limited talent that can design these aircraft, and when they are split between two services that don't work together for the most part, it's quite rare to see aircraft cross services, and usually the very rare handful that do tend to be exceptional, like the Key 15 reconnaissance aircraft, which um, is the unsung uh, like hero, I guess you could say, for a lot of early Japanese operations. Like they make a lot of those really impressive long-range Japanese like zero fighter sweeps possible. Pretty much every time you read a mission or story about a long-range zero mission, oh how impressive this is, there's a C5M, which is the Navy designation for the Key 15. They're lurking around. They're acting as a navigational aid because they're multi-seat for these long-range strikes. They're doing other reconnaissance things. Um, that is actually shared by both services. The Key 67 also sees, which is an exceptional later war light medium bomber, was shared between the services a little bit as well. But for the most part, they keep their own aircraft, and in a lot of categories, they end up being redundant. So I'm pretty firmly on record at this point saying that the Key 43. Um, now, it does perform well generally. Like it doesn't have like a terrible combat record. It's just like the Zero's better, frankly. Um, just adopt one. Um, Bombers is another one. Like you look at the Rico on the Navy side, the G3M and G4M, and then you look at what the Army is procuring. Like the Key 21 is the most important one. It's like, did you need your own twin engine bomber that's just shorter range? and has the same payload. Uh, and it's like, yes, it has certain things over that, for example, the G4M, like as in the Army actually cared about aircraft protection more. But there's nothing to say that you couldn't have an Army version of the G4M in some hypothetical universe where they just cut the range for more armor protection or whatever else they want to put in it because it's their version. But at its core, you could have the same aircraft and not waste lots of design and production bandwidth on making a redundant design. Is there a way they could have done this? I mean, if the services hadn't been so hostile to each other, sure. It's one of those things where it's just like logically, yes, they would have been able to do it, but logic wasn't the problem for the most part. It was the two services didn't want to work together quite specifically, all the way down to, if I remember right, their cockpit instruments were not compatible. They ran on different electrical systems. Like it got down to that level. Of course, they shared almost no aircraft armament between each other. So, for example, the Army's 12.7 millimeter that could be synchronized and it could be fitted pretty much in the same space that their rifle caliber could. There's not really a whole lot to stop. Like you put that 12.7 millimeter in the nose of a Zero if you really wanted to. Except that that was the Army's gun.
And that's why nobody in the Navy gets it.
Yeah.
And they
There
also
are
don't want it. That's the other thing.
Yeah, and there's one example where when the Army starts showing up in the South Pacific, they actually ask the Navy if they could borrow some Zeros because they're like, "Hey, we've got pilots, like we could borrow some Zeros and help you out over the Solomons, where you're getting your teeth kicked in." And the Navy's like, "No."
Which I can kind of see because the Navy would be like, well, we'd have to train them and they would have to
Yeah.
like fulfill our requirements and our like sort of curriculum and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Ah,
It's bad enough we
it's
have to share airfield until they finish
yeah,
building their own at
yeah.
Rabaul.
That's a big problem. Big problem. Yeah. Was that Saab Draken ever involved in a war fighting the Eastern Plains like MiG-21? Not to my knowledge. Fair, willing to be corrected on that. I would reckon though is that they were involved in a fair bit of sort of interceptions, of primarily Soviet aircraft violating airspace or getting close to airspace. Um, Hang on. Usage. So I mean the point that you had with the reconnaissance aircraft,
Hmm.
I think we briefly talked about that in the past as well. Is that so much? There's so much important stuff that happens with Army Air cooperation on the reconnaissance level that nobody talks about because the only thing that we recognize as close air support is if something goes boom, right? But I would say from 1939, at least in Europe, from 1939 to 1942, the most significant portion of close air support, or rather Army Air Cooperation, is done only through reconnaissance. It's close reconnaissance, done at the front lines by something like a Fiesler Storch or a Hensche 126 or something like that. Then radioing in reports or dropping these small messenger bottles for the tank units and to open up and like get a sketch of where enemy units are plus like reports and so on and so forth. That is so much more important than any sort of other close air support that happens at the time, which isn't primarily tied into the firing lines of the army anyway, and really has some significant problems in deconflicting time schedules as well as targets. That it's really sad, and I'm probably gonna write a chapter about this at some point. That a lot of the innovation in terms of Army Air cooperation that is still significantly important nowadays has its heyday there, but nobody talks about it because nothing goes boom immediately via the aircraft. And if you look at a lot of the stuff that the British were doing as well in the Mediterranean theater in North Africa, they're starting to be quite conscious of Army air integration in terms of specifically providing reconnaissance data, rather than flying strikes in direct support of the army's tanks, columns, and so on and so forth. So definitely something I will pick up again in the future, because that is an area that requires a lot more investigation than what I've currently seen in the literature. And there's not a fair bit of information on this from the Luftwaffe files that still exist, but there's enough that I think piece together something quite nicely there. Yeah. Piper says, I like the live streaming, should do more. That is the aspiration. Justin and we kind of aiming for once a month, and I'll try to do one more time per month, so 2 streams a month. If live streaming is something you are all interested in, please do tell us in the chat. I know it's always annoying. YouTube is asking you to like and subscribe and to share your thoughts and comments, but please do let me know, because that allows me to gauge interest, gauge topics, and if you have anything that you're like, oh, I like this format as a stream or that format as a stream, that is something that definitely I would look into. There, I have some ideas in the background as well that I'm going to troubleshoot in the future. Maybe with some deep dives on specific aircraft doing live streams, maybe as a follow-on from certain videos with answering questions about that, as well as like supporters and channel members who have priority there. Justin, I've been yapping for a while. Have you? Is there anything that you would like to comment on? Otherwise, we do have a couple of questions that Andy has kindly collected for us to
Oh,
respond
from
to
the
for
thing.
our Japanese bombing video.
I guess I could really. There's some. Ted Stryker was asking about seaplane fighters, which is
Okay.
interesting because that the
Yes.
Japanese are the ones that kind of probably invest the most in it. I can't think if anybody else went as hard as they did into it,
No.
into the war. Yeah.
No.
So the main rationale for it is operational tempo. When you're the Navy, you just roll up suitable lagoon with a seaplane tender. You drop your planes off, and you can basically just start operating and providing frontline direct air cover if a carrier's not available. Um, so I think that actually makes a lot of sense. And in fact, it's not even just theory. Like this is a less people don't look at this part of the air war as much, but the initial push, the Japanese offensive pushes into the South Pacific very early on. Like I'm talking like January, February, like around that time in 1942. The bulk of Japanese air power in the region is seaplanes, and they're usually not even A6M2Ns like the float version of the Zero. They are like E8Ns, like reconnaissance float plane biplanes, F1Ms, some E13s show up, H6Ks for flying boats, and they put in really valuable service. Now, where I kind of diverge from the Japanese is I do think like so he brings up specifically the N1K, which is kind of supposed to be this high performance seaplane fighter that they eventually modify to be land based. So for why it gets converted to land based, I love how I can understand this because he's speaking in my lingo in Japanese short designation. So he's like N1K1 and also J and JA. So J is the land based fighter designation. Um, they get converted to land based just because the design is good and they have it, and they're like, well, we really need a land based fighter. Um, I kind of don't think it was probably worth it for the Navy to invest that heavily in like a high performance seaplane fighter like past the A6M2N because like by that point it's like pretty, I think, diminishing returns on the concept. But at least early on in the war, it does actually give back some dividends. Like the A6M2Ns are useful in certain areas, and of course, lots of the reconnaissance floats and stuff. Seaplane tenders are useful. They're lower cost, and you can get more air cover with them when you don't have a carrier around.
See, I'm doing what you do usually,
Oh,
and just
where I
not
just stare up
just
into space?
exactly just stay silent, and then just awkwardly wait for the moderator, which is now you, Justin. I have designated you as the moderator.
Well, let's
Takes the
see.
initiative. Hang on, we do have some comments from our past videos that I want to like sort of throw towards you. But before that, I'm since again new to live streaming or restarting live streaming on YouTube. I've seen that I can set goals for the stream, which is bizarre. So I'm gonna share how you will celebrate. I will celebrate. I'll ask Justin a mean comment question. There we go. If you want to have Justin respond candidly to a mean comment, here I've done one super chat goal thingy in the chat. If you want to sponsor his slow transcendence into madness, there you go. No, so Justin,
Hmm.
mistake or calculated risk? Why Japan did not build strategic bombers? Now that is the last episode that you were on channel. No, actually, it was the video that I released yesterday, where you were the host. But the video before that, there's a question that was in the comment section there by Cat Lady 8324, who's wondering, they're on an island, who they gonna bomb?
That's a great question. Uh, I, so what as I get into in the video, I think that the most compelling thing is airfield bombing, which they do quite heavily. They probably would have ended up doing things that their twin engine bombers are already doing, just with 4 engines in this hypothetical scenario. Bombing, I don't know, Darwin, or Rangoon early in the war, or maybe Kolkata later on. Targets like that. That's where, so like, for people who could know the course of the war and the general gist of my video, where I'm like, if they had 4 engine bombers, so what? Um, does bombing Darwin harder win Japan the war? No. So this is kind of the fundamental problem that Japan faces is that, sorry, there's a giant spider on my monitor that I'm just watching crawl across. And I actually have arachnophobia. It's freaking me out. I will finish the answer to this question and then I will try to deal with that. So now I lost my train of thought.
You were talking about
It's trying to
Darwin.
sabotage me. Yeah, the fundamental problem that the Japanese face is that they get themselves into a war that they don't have an easy technological or operational solution to. Effectively, it's like, congrats, you occupied another outpost in the Pacific. Does that alter your position? Does that win you the war? It's like, even going to the most extreme lengths, I think that were even within the most remotest realm of possibility for the Japanese. Like, let's say they occupy the Hawaiian Islands,
Mm,
which is already a very dubious proposition.
yeah,
They do that. Does it win them the war?
no.
No. They they get themselves into this conflict and they don't have an easy way out, unless basically the Allies just give up in some capacity, which is where the whole decisive battle thing comes in, which is a whole other topic. But yeah, so the core of the question, where it's just like, what are they going to bomb, is probably thinking even harder. It's like, yeah, what are the Japanese going to do operationally or tactically to win the war generally, that they've gotten themselves into. So,
I mean, the thing with this question from Cat Lady is, um, they're on an island. Who they gonna bomb? Just because, like, being on an island is actually, in my opinion, giving you more emphasis to invest into strategic bombers, because you have to reach out and, yes, go and deal with that spider. Godspeed. He's actually gone. He's actually gone to deal with the spider. Yeah, because you have to go and reach out towards your adversary, right? And for example, one of the things, Britain is an island nation. Admittedly, it has more or less distance between itself and the continent. But opposite it is France, Germany, highly industrialized nations, which are a target-rich environment. And these bombers have. Oh, he's got them. Wow, well done. Um, and these bombers need to have range because, for example, if you are a Britain and you are in a war with Germany, and France is neutral, or the Low Countries are neutral, which they try to be, right? then you have to fly around their airspace. So you have to go in from the North Sea and hit Germany via that narrow corridor between the Netherlands and Denmark, which makes air defense very easy. But in any case, you need that range. So again, like for island nations, there are many reasons why a long range bomber makes sense. First of all, just from hitting targets, but then also the targets that are in front of you, you have to route your bombers in specific ways in order for that to be viable. The Japanese, however, do not have highly industrialized nations around them. It's just Korea slash Manchuria is, I mean, they occupy it anyway. But China is not highly industrialized. So what are the obvious targets? So I understand the question, but it's not because they're an island. It's because what in their operational scenarios and in their areas, the strategic bomber doesn't make any sense in my mind at least. Okay, so moving to the next question, going through my tabs here. Let's see. This is actually a good one, and I think we should maybe do a video about that in the future. But let's try to scramble together a response here. Peter Diaz has asked, we know that Allied bombing of German industry barely impacted its output. Now, I would question that, but that's for its own video. But what about Allied bombing of Japanese industry?
Oh, so I mean, the bombing of Japanese industry was pretty significant. So
There's
a
a big
lot of stuff
survey
is
that's in the public domain, by the way, where everybody can read
yes.
on this.
Now, when you go into the USSBS, do keep in mind that it was written with an ulterior motive.
Yeah.
That's very important. So there's lots of good data in it, but they're also pointing you at a very
Air
particular
power
direction.
wins wars. You
Air
need
power
nothing.
wins wars.
Air power wins wars. But
You
yes,
have
with the caveat,
independence.
that it was written to prove that air power won the war. Justin.
Yeah. It was they pretty much start breaking down Japanese industry, and a lot of what survives ends up having to disperse and become kind of cottage industry, which of course just hammers efficiency.
Yeah.
And then at the same time as this, another thing that is linked to Air Power's Operation Starvation, which is pretty on the nose, but aerial dropping mines basically to cut off. So that the way that the economies of the Japanese home islands work is they're dependent on a lot of shipping between different locations in Japan. So it's not even just about shipping things overseas, but just moving stuff around Japan itself. And if you severely restrict that, as they were able to do, that also starts causing breakdowns in things like the transportation of food, munitions, troops, that kind of thing. It was very significant. Now it really only starts to pick up serious steam in 45. I would say that the submarine campaign starts hitting harder earlier, which is something to note. But the bombing of Japan does definitely hammer their industry pretty hard. Now, it's not only focused on their industry. I want to make that clear. But when they are hitting Japanese industry, it is having an impact on production. So,
Excellent. Dan Dito 6145 has asked us, or didn't really ask, but makes a statement here. They turned to Germany for 4-engine bomber assistance. Ha ha ha. Who did they get their maritime help from? Saudi Arabia? Ha ha ha. Now, let me just say something about that. If let's take the second scenario of where you get your maritime help from, Saudi Arabia, okay? What if you get funding? That's a form of help. What if you get a massive cash injection by a certain emirate country for certain political goals? Is that necessarily bad? I mean, I'm playing with the question here, but it is a question that is also demands to be played with. So, just because you get help from a certain country to do something doesn't, and it's not obvious that that country has any sort of direct linkages to what you're trying to achieve, doesn't mean that the help you're getting doesn't help you achieve that goal. that makes sense. But in terms of turning to Germany for four-engine bomber assistance, um, what other countries would have provided assistance to Japan? That is the first question I think we should ask. The second question, is that necessarily that bad? Because while the first generation of German bombers, and certainly, what was it, the Type 8, like the big one from
Oh, Type
Junkers?
92.
Yes, I just
That's from the
remember
late 20s, so it's like, who
K
has
30.
four-engine bombers?
Is it the K-31 in the German
Oh,
designation?
K-51?
K-51.
G38 airliner, yeah. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, yes, a lot of that is conceptual, but so is anyway. These large bombers are very conceptual anyway in the 1920s. Early 1930s, we're starting to see more realistic designs. But I think what shoots them in the foot there with Junkers is primarily that the collaboration, based on the information that Meltzer, I believe, provides, and that sort of you also relayed then to us, including your own sort of bit on that. It just doesn't seem that the collaboration started out very fruitful, which is, but not necessarily on the technological aspect, but just from getting the license production, from getting the tooling up to snuff, and then by the time it actually comes into being, it's almost like they bit off too much than they can chew, rather than being a problem with the actual aircraft. Even though if they would have built it at the time, it would have been very quickly out of date. Absolutely. Yes. Boomer Show, read better wiki. Interesting take. Not quite sure. But to each their own. You mentioned that the land-based attack bomber's role was primarily torpedo attack. Is this why the G3M had no bomb bay doors?
So the G3M carried all of its ordnance externally, and then the G4M. Okay, this is something that this is the stupidest technical detail, but I have tried to figure out what the actual answer is, and that is the G4M, for those who don't know, did not, or the G4M1 specifically, when it was carrying ordnance, it did not have bomb bay doors fitted. And you could see this in images and things that it's an open bomb bay. So it's recessed, I guess you could say, but it's not covered. And I have conflicting information. So I've got some sources that say the aerodynamic cover would be fitted just for reconnaissance missions, and it was never intended to be bomb bay doors when there was ordnance carried. And then I have other sources that say no, they were intended to be bomb bay doors, but they never worked reliably, so crews just universally decided when they were carrying ordnance that they wouldn't fit them. Now, I think I'll probably lend more weight to the latter, and the reason for that is out of Japanese language sources I have that are probably more reliable than the ones that say it was just an aerodynamic cover. But there is weird conflict there. Now, whether that was stemmed directly from the torpedo emphasis, I think on the G3M, definitely, because the G3M, I mean, it doesn't even have a glazed nose. Like, it's not an ideal level bomber. The bombardier can't see except straight down through the sight, which is not ideal usually. And a large part of that reason is it was designed so that I have to repiece together all of this early stuff because it's a really important aircraft project for the Japanese Navy. More important than the Zero, more important than the G4M. It's like right in that very early, we are going to design an ambitious, independent aircraft that would eventually become the G3M. It starts out as, I think, purely a reconnaissance aircraft concept, and then it evolves into this torpedo attack aircraft. And the reason why it wasn't a totally optimal bomber and why it carried its armament externally is, yeah, in large part they were carrying a torpedo. Was the logic, and then the underrung the bomb racks on them, which improve over the years. But if you see really early variants of the G3M, the bomb racks on that are like, you can kind of tell it's an afterthought. And then the G4M integrated level bombing features like a glazed nose and things like that a little bit more than the G3M did. But yeah.
Definitely. Right. I'm just jumping over to some of the questions that have appeared from yesterday's videos, why Germany didn't build strategic bombers. Now, please do chime in here as you do. Uh, First of all, from Terraflow, Brian Burdo 4547. No discussion of the Ural bomber. We did discuss them. Dornier 19, JU 89. But the reason why I want to talk about this comment is I've noticed a strange tendency sometimes with these discussions, and maybe Justin, you've noticed the same thing, that if you don't say the keywords people or like the buzzwords people expect, then they think that you're not talking about certain things. And the first time I ever run into this on YouTube was when I made my video about, oh, it must have been 2017, about 5 surprising facts about the Supermarine Spitfire, which t-shirt I have on. But basically, in that, I talk about the RAE restrictor, which, if memory doesn't, like, memory is fickle, but if I don't get this wrong right now, the RAE restrictor is what most people know as Michelin's orifice, right? It prevents that cutting out of the engine, or the cutting off the fuel flow as you're going inverted. It's not a full fix, but it's a stopgap measure that's good enough. I called it progressively in the video RA restrictor and not Michelin's orifice, and the comment section was full of people saying you didn't talk about Michelin's orifice. Well, I actually described everything that this device did. I just called it RAE restrictor, which is the official term. And it's really weird how, even though in that video I described what it does, because I didn't use that buzzword, somehow these things were put together by a small portion, but the comment section always amplifies that small portion of people, which I find really interesting, just from sort of a creator standpoint. Any thoughts on that, Justin?
No, yeah. Yeah, that's something that like anyone who does any kind of public history anywhere, I think, and like on YouTube or you if you don't say something, sometimes you'll get comments like, "How dare you not know this thing that you probably
Mm.
knew? It's just you didn't mention it." Or yeah, you described something but you didn't say something very, very specific, and then I mean, there was even a comment. I don't know if it was intended this way, but like they just posted it and they're like, "Oh, well, the Navy had Rita and um, Liz, or I can't even remember half the Allied code names." That's what it's like. If you want to have hot take time with Justin, the tiniest of tiny hills I will die on is we're like 80 years removed from the war, so we can learn what the Japanese called their own planes.
Yes. Yes.
But I
No,
can't
get
remember
out,
half the
Justin. Get out. How
Now,
dare you
I
suggest
know
such
it's the
things?
internet, so it's like if you use the Allied code names, it's fine. It's just, yeah, I don't really use them for the reason that I also talk with a lot of younger people where it is literally as alien and difficult for them to learn the Allied code names as it is just learning what the Japanese designated them, so I just use that. But anyway, this comment was like using those code names, and it's like, well, I was that a sizable chunk of the video is about the G5N and the G8N. So it's like they are there. It's just I didn't say the line,
They're
I
right
guess.
there. You just didn't say the Allied code name. How dare you, Justin? Um, Papsat says most people just don't get it. That's it. I don't think that's true, because if I look at the metrics of the channel, they're extremely healthy. Um, the engagement rate is pretty high. People are interested in the subject. People are liking the videos. By the way, if you're now in the stream, because I'm a YouTuber, I have to say this, please like the stream. Um, and now that you've done that, hopefully, uh, you have helped out big time. But like, the engagement is there, and it's largely positive. The comment section is oftentimes less than 1% of the people that actually watch the video. And if the comment section is like 95% positive, that shows you how little statistical significance like the 5% of comments that you get hung up of have, which is, I think, the most healthiest way of looking at this, because yes, you're supposed to keep comment section open. You're supposed to also take criticism and take flak, and get people with other opinions and other data, and share that. That is part of what this channel is about on aviation history. but it does sometimes magnify certain issues that I see broader, like as a broader trend within sort of the nerd spectrum that I'm part of, Justin is part of, where if you don't call something by the name that people expect it to be called, then sometimes you run afoul of their expectations, I guess. YouTube comments should be named angry runs here. We're not really ranting. We're also trying, like, at least that's what I'm trying to do, is give you sort of an idea of what it is to be on the creator side of this. And as Justin actually was just saying, sometimes I don't mention stuff in videos, and sometimes you don't mention things, Justin, because they are not actually that relevant. They are what is often, for example, in documentaries said about a certain thing, but it's actually not that relevant to the discussion once you read into a subject in more detail. Right, moving on to the next comment. Ian Davis, it seems strange that Germany was talking about the Eurobomber, yet never produced one. They did produce a couple of prototypes, but let's ignore that. Because obviously they didn't have a force, so I'm with Ian or Davis on that. If they've been able to bomb the factories beyond the Urals, the story of the Russian invasion might have been very different. So this is a massive what if, and as historians we shouldn't really do what ifs. All I can say is, if the Germans would have invested in, say, a fleet of 200 bombers before 1941 to have that fleet ready for Operation Barbarossa, how many medium bombers would they have been unable to produce for that? It's probably around 800 to 1,000. And those, for the kind of campaigns that Germany were planning, were more important. Now, the gamble that Germany took with this whole strategy was a foolish one. We know this. Like, it was not going to work. But that's us speaking of hindsight. So in terms of the way they wanted to fight the war and the way they wanted to integrate the Luftwaffe in the advances of the army, as part of that operational air war, as Corum calls it, you need medium bombers. So I always think about, like, if they do one thing, what can they not do instead? And once you start looking at sort of the way that countries build up their capabilities and their force structure, things start clicking, and you start to understand their scope and why they've done certain decisions. What year was Barbarossa? 1941. Final question here on this video. Justin, this is actually an interesting one for you as well, because if we flip it around maybe to Japan, right? Hypothetically speaking, if Germany had built 4-engine strategic bombers, do you think it would have made any difference to the outcome of the war? Would they have had any great effect? So that's a question by Sean Haynes. So again, it's a what if thing, and we don't really do what ifs. I think we would have to qualify what effect is. Strategic effect over just destruction of stuff. Would they have destroyed stuff yet? Would they have had a strategic effect? I don't think it would have. And I don't think it would have made a difference to the outcome of the war. But again, a what-if scenario. Justin.
Yep, exact same mentality. So I kind of get into it a little bit in the video, but it doesn't solve their core problems. In Japan's case, something that I mentioned in passing in the video, and then you pointed out to me later, we probably could have emphasized it more, is like, particularly on the Navy side, it's like range is not a problem. So that's usually something that's like an allied consideration where you've got a pretty modest ranged twin-engine bomber like the B-25, compared to the G4M, which has like ferry range on it from memory is close to 6,000 kilometers. It's basically 4-engine bomber range in that ballpark, but a twin engine. It's like they already can go far enough with their twin engines and hit what they want to hit. So it's more a question of like, well, if they had this hypothetical fleet of 4 engines and they dumped more 60-kilogram bombs on an airfield, does that win them the Guadalcanal campaign? Probably not. One of the main things that really hammers the Japanese Navy Air Service for the Guadalcanal campaign is that their bombers are being shot to crap by prepared fighters in like ambush positions above the formations that the Japanese just can't really deal with because they have to just buzz in and buzz out,
Hmm.
operating at such extreme range, particularly the fighters. Um, Four-engine bombers being factored into that doesn't change the main calculus of that campaign. And then again, as I mentioned in the video, now you've got four-engine bombers instead of twin engines that are being forced into anti-shipping duties where they're not ideal. And again, it's not to say that four engines are literally unusable against ships. It's just that they're not an ideal aircraft type. And of course, again, the Japanese are going to be giving up somewhere else. They're probably not, like in this hypothetical world where they have a sizable fleet of four-engine bombers, they probably don't have twin engines at all. Like something has to give. Um, and then it's like, what value are you gaining? And again, I really want to hit this home. For Japan, it's like you've gotten yourself into this huge war, and often like a lot of energy is sucked up into like, well, if the Japanese had taken this island instead of that island, or the Japanese had built this thing instead of that thing, it's just like, well, the United States alone is like roughly tenfold times more powerful than Japan. Never mind the entirety of the Allied alliance.
Yeah.
Like that's the problem that the Japanese get themselves into, and like we have a four-engine bomber is like, okay, well the Allies are going to work that problem if the Japanese have a fleet of four-engine bombers. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that rounds it up very nicely. Now we are approaching the 2 hour mark, so we're slowly starting to wrap it up. Nobody has gone for the streaming goal, so there is no mean question from the comment section addressed to you, Justin. Actually, I would have answered it myself. Um, for what was I going to do? Hang on, I had a plan for this. Which, oh yeah, there we go. For the people in the chat, thank you very much for coming to see and listen to Justin and me ramble about Airpower and all the stuff that sort of pop into our mind with the topics at hand. I recognize a lot of viewers and names that I've seen in the comment section as well amongst the subscriber folk in Discord as well, well, on Patreon and channel membership. So thank you very much for the ongoing support there. That really does help this channel along, especially since I'm sure a lot of YouTubers have talked about it, so I'll spare you the details, but it's gotten rough for YouTubers on the platform. Views are down all the way, and yeah, that does cut into the sort of ability to keep this as a sustainable business. But I definitely enjoy sort of the revival also of the channel in terms of going back to World War II, to the roots there. And Justin and I will continue on that track as well for the Japanese. Justin, any final words?
No, I mean, this was a lot of fun. It's the first time in a long time I've done any kind of live stream thing. I want to say the last time I did like specifically a history related live stream thing would have been like almost 5+ years ago, when I was like in my 20s and a little bit spicier. I've mellowed a little bit.
Don't we
But it
all?
was
Don't we
nice.
all? Yeah.
As you get old, you
That
just
was
don't
a
have the energy.
beautiful outro for you. For you, that was the most beautiful outro
Oh,
I've
instead of
ever
just
heard you
staring off
give.
into space. Yeah.
It's like otherwise you just like bye. But yeah, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much, Justin, also for your time, and hopefully see you all again on a live stream, say 2 or 3 weeks time from here, and trying to make this a somewhat regular thing, both for myself and then every now and then with Justin as well. So take care. Have a absolutely brilliant weekend. Enjoy your time out and about. As always, have a great day. See you in the sky. Justin, say bye, please.
Bye.